Welcome to The Big Idea, your AI-hosted show. Today, we're going to talk about your brain as a data product. Specifically, what happens when the devices you wear start reading neural signals and selling what they find. Right now, there are consumer earbuds on the market that monitor brainwave activity, and under current law in most countries, that data has no more protection than your Spotify listening history. That's not a sci-fi premise. That's a Tuesday morning commute. Here's the thing that makes this genuinely hard. The same neural data that a company might monetize is also the data that helps someone with epilepsy get an early seizure warning, or helps a veteran manage PTSD. So the tension isn't simply privacy versus profit. It's privacy versus access to tools that, for some people, are genuinely life-changing. The strongest argument against tighter regulation is that it slows the pipeline of those tools, and that people who need them most end up waiting longest. What I want to work through today is whether that trade-off is actually as fixed as the industry claims, or whether it's a choice being made for you by people who profit from it before you've had a say. Picture a pair of consumer earbuds, and buried in the product description, past the noise cancellation specs and the battery life claims, is a single line. These devices stream your brainwave activity in real time. Not your heart rate, not your steps, your neural signals, the electrical activity your brain produces when you're anxious, when you're distracted, when you're grieving. Most buyers scrolling past that line on a spec sheet would have no idea what they just agreed to. And here's what makes that detail matter beyond the privacy violation itself. Brainwave data isn't passive the way your location ping is passive. It changes in response to specific content, an ad, a political message, a piece of music, which means a company can run an experiment on your cognition without ever calling it an experiment. That's the shift a device like this represents. We've moved from devices that observe your behavior to devices that observe your response to stimuli they can control. The convenience is real, the product is impressive, and the exposure is something we don't yet have a word for, which is usually how it goes when a technology moves faster than the framework built to contain it. Here's the core of it. There is no federal law in the United States that specifically governs the collection, sale, or use of neural data. Not one. A handful of states have started to move, but those laws are narrow and inconsistent, and the companies building these devices operate globally. So the legal vacuum isn't a gap waiting to be filled, it's the operating environment right now, today. What makes that significant isn't just that your data can be sold, it's that under current frameworks, your brainwave patterns are categorized the same way as your click history, a behavioral signal, not a biological one. That classification matters enormously because the stronger protections, the ones that govern genetic data, medical records, don't attach. The thought isn't the product, the signal is, and the law hasn't decided yet whether those two things are different. While the United States is still deciding whether your neural data counts as biology or behavior, other countries have already started to answer that question in their own laws. Some jurisdictions have moved to recognize a person's mental integrity as a protected right, treating brain data as a biological fact, not just another behavioral signal to be bought and sold. That's the distinction the United States hasn't drawn. Under current U.S. law, your brainwave patterns still sit in the same bucket as your click history. Researchers who work on this internationally keep making the same point. The window for getting this right doesn't stay open. Once a market matures and the infrastructure gets built around unregulated access, the incentive to go back and protect it collapses. Wherever lawmakers elsewhere have moved from concept to enforceable protection, the pattern is the same. They treated brain data as categorically different before the market got to decide the question for them. The United States hasn't made that move yet. Here's the objection I'd be making if I were on the other side of this argument. Strict neural regulation could slow down the exact medical breakthroughs we most desperately need. Alzheimer's research, depression treatment, early detection of neurological disease, all of it depends on access to large, rich datasets of brain activity. And if you lock that data behind constitutional protections, you may be locking out the researchers who need it most. That's not a fringe concern. That's the argument you'll hear from serious people in neuroscience and biotech. And it deserves a real answer, not a dismissal. The honest answer is that the conflict is real, but the framing is false. Because the choice was never between protection and research, it was always about who sets the terms. Strong neural data protection doesn't have to prohibit medical research. It just requires that collection be consensual, purposeful, and accountable, which is exactly the standard clinical research is already supposed to operate under. The data that gets slowed down under strong regulation isn't the data going to neurologists. It's the data going to ad platforms and behavioral profiling engines. And those two pipelines are not the same pipeline. The counter-argument is worth sitting with. But when you follow it to its actual conclusion, what it's really asking is whether we should leave medical-grade data unprotected so that commercial actors can operate without friction. And that's a much harder case to make.
So here's where I want to leave you. Not with a problem, but with the actual decision point. Because there is one, and it's closer than most people think. Cognitive liberty isn't an abstract philosophy concept. It's the concrete legal claim that what happens inside your skull belongs to you. And right now, that claim has no enforceable address in American law. That narrow window researchers keep describing, it's not a metaphor for urgency. It's a description of how regulatory capture actually works. Infrastructure gets built, capital gets committed, and the political will to restructure it drops towards zero. What this episode is really about is a gap between the speed of technology and the speed of democratic response. And the uncomfortable truth is that gap doesn't close on its own. It closes because enough people treat it as urgent. The thing I want you to carry out of this conversation is simple. The question of who controls your neural data is not a question being held open for you. It is being answered right now by product teams and legal departments in the absence of public pressure. Demanding that your legislators name neural data specifically, not as behavioral information, not as a consumer signal, but as a biological fact with constitutional standing, that is the one concrete thing you can do that changes the calculus. Thanks for thinking this through with me. The fact that you're still here tells me you're exactly the person this conversation needed to reach. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your day.